friends, family, followers, and subscribers? Welcome to another video. It also seems to be kind of a trend whenever I'm about to record a video. I'm wearing a sports shirt. So, today I'm a Georgia fan, which is fine because I love the Dogs. You might see me in an LSU shirt sometime soon. Hey, I also love the Tigers. My priority is to the Dogs because that's where I went to college. But I also have family ties at LSU, so deal with it. You know who you are. I am your host, fellow Winchester brother, and man of letters, Bradford Cheeble, here to, you guessed it, talk about Supernatural. But today, I'm going to talk to you guys about the mythology behind the pop culture phenomenon that has taken the internet, specifically Twitter and Tumblr, by storm. Here we go. We're diving in. So first off, the show is basically, in the words of Jensen Ackles, I think it was,
quote,
Route 66 meets X-Files.
end quote.
But as the show evolved, it grew into something much more. So what I mean by that is, in the first couple seasons, you mostly see the brothers traveling around the back roads of the United States, finding cases where people die in their locked bedrooms, or they die just in freak accidents that no one else can explain. And a lot of those cases involve ghosts and hauntings, which is really interesting. And a lot of that backstory is based on spirits not moving on to the next life in the show's mythology and sticking around, attaching themselves to objects, so on and so forth, and then slowly losing what made them human. That's an interesting commentary on the show's theme of agency, because while we do have power to make our own choices, whether or not those choices are good or evil totally depend on us, regardless of your religious views. That is just a commonality between humanity and people of different races and whatnot. But a lot of the show's mythology is based on religious and pagan ideas throughout history. One of the biggest ones that influenced the show is Judeo-Christian mythology. So, in instance, the narrative of the Bible, angels, demons, God, so on and so forth, that drastically changed the show, starting season 4 and going all the way through the end of the final season. But some of the other influences included paganism, Zoroastrianism, apologize if I mispronounced that, numerous monsters, and not to mention some of the stuff that the show just made up for entertainment, which is really interesting. Monsters you'll find on the show include Wendigo's second episode, literally. There's an episode on Bloody Mary. There's also episodes on the depths of the human psyche, which is really interesting. But some of the more common monsters you'll find Sam and Dean fighting are vampires, werewolves, witches, ghosts. And a lot of those episodes are really good. And they're usually a case of the week episodes. It's just a tangent. But some of those episodes just take a twist and really add character development and backstory to Sam and Dean, which is so cool. And some of those more unique monsters include like pagan gods that you wouldn't think are worth telling stories about. And that's really interesting. What makes the show even more interesting is that it initially started off as just, like I said, X-Files meets Route 66. And they kind of combine in the middle to make Supernatural. The first 2 seasons are basically about building the groundwork for the rest of the series in terms of the mythology. You'll mainly see case of the week episodes, Sam and Dean going to fight a ghost or a werewolf or a vampire or a poltergeist or something. And then there will be a through line that'll be about their relationship and learning how to deal with complex family relationships. And the genre in the first couple seasons is more of a horror movie. It's like a horror movie each week. But as the show goes on, it turns into more of a sci-fi family drama. And why that affects the mythology is because the show grew past the case of the week episodes. While those didn't go away, they just evolved. And so as the show goes on, you get more in-depth mythology, such as angels. You spend so many seasons on angels, which angels are fascinating. And then you get demons. Demons were at the beginning of the show, but they played a much more central role going down the line. You get reapers, and you even get the incarnation of death, which is fascinating to think about. And then my personal favorite, you get into archangels and Nephilim. You get into God, and on his show, this is the completely made up for the mythology of the show. God has a sister named the Darkness, and they kind of represent yin and yang, being and nothingness, creation and destruction, so on and so forth. It's really interesting, but just to be sensitive to their audience, the showrunners decided, let's stay away from religious beliefs as much as we can. But I'll touch on that in a minute. Alternate realities it plays a central role in some of the final seasons. And I think that's really interesting because, again, this is not something the show went into depth about, but it involves the idea of human agency. And some of those alternate realities that Sam and Dean visit involve their decisions and whether or not they existed in that specific world. And so you start to think this mythology is all about backing the idea of family, all about backing the idea of agency. And that's really interesting. But I'm going to go on a little bit more. So the show mainly keeps the mythology lighthearted, and it tries to keep it broad while also introducing original elements. And that is primarily because, like I said, it wants to stay grounded in the ideas of family and agency. I will go on a tangent in it for a minute and say I hate when shows change canon. Supernatural changes canon a lot. But it's fine. Because we love the show. That's right, haters. Back off. Sorry, I'm being really quiet right now. I'm trying to keep my voice down. But some of the show's biggest hurdles that it had to overcome in terms of family and agency came because they wanted to be as sensitive to people's theological beliefs, people's religious beliefs as possible. And so some of those examples were from the two stars themselves, Jared and Jensen. They had some stuff to say about it. One thing that Jensen says in an interview with hiddenremote.com a few years ago is, quote, "We didn't want to be a mouthpiece for the writer's religious views because it wasn't the show we had signed up for. Our argument was, we trust you. You've done good by us so far. However, this is our one concern, and we're just bringing it to the table so that we can discuss it." End quote. And that's really interesting because Jensen claims to be from a fairly religious, conservative, Christian family, and he's playing a character on a show that struggles with faith through some of the seasons. But he separated that from his actual personal life, and he told the writers that straight up, and they were very respectful of it. But also, as they're going on tours and going to conventions, they're meeting people who are watching the shows who are Christian pastors, Christian ministers, Christian missionaries, and they love the show. And so just to avoid controversy, they do try to steer clear of manipulating the Bible. The Bible merely serves as inspiration for the story. I think that's really interesting. Whether or not I agree with the show's theology is a different story. I watch it because all that stuff, to me, is immaterial because the show is about family. The show is about agency. The show is about making tough choices, complicated family relationships in a very, very complex multiverse, if you will. But some of the things I'm going to go more into detail about, just going to give you a brief overview of my favorite mythologies personally, and that was the archangels and the Nephilim and the alternate realities. And so the archangels are basically angels, but more powerful, have reality warping abilities. So you see Gabriel, season 2, who will distort reality, create illusions, send Sam and Dean into a time loop. See season 3, episode 11, Mystery Spot, one of the best episodes of the series in my opinion. And you'll see them just have reality warping powers, and that takes on a more central role in seasons 12 through 15 because Lucifer, the devil, yes, he makes a reappearance on the show and has a pretty central storyline. And he sires a son with a human woman, and that turns out to be a Nephilim. And on the show, Nephilim they are still human angel hybrids, but they are more powerful than the angel that sired them because the soul is seen as something that's pure energy, while an angel's grace is basically a droplet of creation and has powers similar to that. And so when they combine, there is more power at their disposal. And so if a Nephilim is sired by an archangel, it's going to be more powerful than the archangel that sired it, if that makes sense. And so enter Jack Klein, one of my personal favorite characters of the show. Character examination for him is coming, so stay tuned. However, some of their power includes they have limited powers of God. They can warp reality. They can create illusions. They can possess people. They can do almost anything they want. And it's really interesting because they become very hard to kill. And not to mention in the show, when the show's version of God like abandons heaven, the archangels are put in charge. And so they're faced with difficulties involving the absence of God and how to run heaven and keep it a family. And how that plays out in the alternate realities is that, like I was saying earlier, it does depend on choices and it does depend on certain events that do happen. Season 13, while it could have gone more into depth about that, decided to stay focused on what the archangels did in God's absence that kind of turned them into these monsters. And so you definitely see the more personal and ruthless side of their powers in season 13. And you definitely see that with Michael and Lucifer because you see them striking out at each other. You see them blowing up cities for no apparent reason. Those are some of the more interesting angles of the supernatural mythology because, I don't know, it's cool to see like, oh, angels have this essence inside of them. They have grace per se. And that can be used for spells. That can be used for reality warping. That can be used for opening portals. That can be used for literally creation itself. And that can be given and taken away. It can be replenished. It can heal disease. But it can also harm humans. And it's just interesting. But another interesting thing about angels is that if they want to take a vessel, they must have their vessel's consent. So they cannot possess a dead person. They have to possess somebody living because they have to have that person's consent. See? The show has a lot more nuance and complexity than you might realize. And it opens a lot of interesting, thought-provoking ideas. It has actually influenced a lot of the ideas I've had personally for my book series. I've really enjoyed exploring those ideas, and I'm still continuing to explore those ideas. But those are for future videos and future times. So thanks for tuning in. I hope you stay tuned. There's a lot more to come. So like, subscribe, let me know what you think in the comments below. And a very happy new year, I might add. 2020 was a get out of here. And I will talk to you guys soon. Peace.